So certainly from that point, we have to accept the fact that the Gulf states are facing a certain dilemma at the moment. On the one hand, you have this reliance on the United States as being your primary security guarantor. And that's a relationship that has been built up now for 40 years, that has become strong. But what we've seen over the last sort of 10 years, specifically I think since the 2003 invasion of Iraq, is an increased uncertainty about the relationship with the United States and the sense of direction. Questions about resolve from the US, about its own strategic direction, about whether the interests of the US and those of the GCC states necessarily still match to the same degree that has been the case earlier on. So there's a lot of questions out here about the credibility of the US. Some of the key areas have already been mentioned. Iraq. Iraq was not seen as a war of necessity. Afghanistan, yes, but not Iraq. Once you got involved in Iraq with the United States, then it opened the opportunity for Iran to spread its influence. We lost a key balance of power in the region. Now we're facing the prospects of withdrawal of the United States from Iraq. I think there's still the sense in the Arab Gulf that the job is certainly unfinished. And what kind of situation will we face? It wasn't our choice that we're confronted with this situation, but it's there. And unfortunately, one has to still deal with this unfinished business. I think on the Arab-Israeli front, there's been increased concern and unhappiness, a lot of frustration. We have to remember it was the King Abdullah Initiative in 2002 that became the Arab Peace Initiative in the end, that not only promised peace, but it actually also promised Israel normalization. It went far beyond anything else that's been out on the table. But the US has never really supported this initiative. And now again, we face an increased difficult situation out there. We have to remember even that the GCC states are responsive to their own publics and to public opinion and very sensitive. If we see a further deterioration on this front, it's going to be something that is very difficult for the states also to deal with. We've seen the different speeches of President Obama in Istanbul and in Cairo, but we haven't really seen anything resulting out of that. It's been a great promises and lofty ideals, but so far very little translation into practice, I think. From these things, there's this disappointment, and the Gulf sort of has been pushed into trying to become more self-reliant and trying to take matters more into its own hands. But that still presents another dilemma because we have to be honest, and there are limited capabilities of the GCC states. They can't defend themselves completely militarily against Iran. They have certain capabilities, but they're still limited. There's still a lot of catching up to do, even internally, institutionalization. I think the Gulf states still need a lot of work to do. So we have this problem with the US on the one hand as being an ally that's maybe not as reliable and as foresighted as we wish, but we also have very little alternatives at the other hand. If we look broader and to the wider international community, Europe and Asia are certainly areas that have increased their focus on the Gulf, that have expanded their activities in the Gulf. Europe now doesn't look at the Middle East as just being the Arab-Israeli issue or just being composed of the Levant and Egypt and North Africa, but it pays attention to what goes on in the Gulf. We saw the EU3 try to engage with Iran and tried to put forward a policy by itself. We see strengthened cooperation between the EU and the GCC that has taken on a certain institutional basis in the last few years. And we now have a formalized work program in place between the two institutions to look at areas of cooperation. We see increased attention being paid by Asia to the Gulf, simply because of the fact this is where Asia gets its energy supplies from that region. And therefore it has also a direct stake in what happens in the region. For South Asia, for countries like India, the majority of the working population in the Gulf comes from that part. So there's also a deep interest what happens to them. But on the other hand, neither Asia or Europe really have the capabilities or the willingness, I think, to come in and replace the United States. Europe certainly doesn't have neither the consensus within the European Union or the military capabilities and willingness to come in and say, okay, we present an alternative to the Gulf. Asian countries, China, I think China is pretty happy with the way it is. I mean, it has the United States sort of to try to take care of things in the Gulf. It doesn't need to expand militarily into the region itself, despite its deep reliance on the oil from the region. And in any case, these are unknown for us. How will actually China evolve in the next 10 years, and what kind of role can it play in Gulf security? There's still a lot of question marks on that. So we have this real dilemma of not knowing what we'd like, in a way. We'd like to have some alternative choices, but if we dig deep down, I don't think we really see anything alternatively at the moment. So the one impact has simply been that the Gulf has at least tried to take on a little bit of the job on its own. There have been an increased effort to better the integration in the region, to strengthen the GCC. I think we've seen some tangible results. We have an electricity grid in place. We have plans for a railroad network. GCC nationals can work in one of the other states. There's free travel with ID cards. There's a customs union in place, plans for implementing the common market, looking also possibly at a common currency. And certainly there's been this move towards a greater consensus within the Gulf states themselves about the challenges that the region faces, and trying to put forward a more coherent policy. So I think that, we always talk sometimes about Saudi initiatives or Qatar initiatives in the region, or the UAE following certain policies. But I think in the end of the day, they follow pretty much a common agreement among the GCC states about what their interests are, and trying to further those interests a little bit. I think I'll just leave it right there, and then we can engage in more discussion during the questions and answers.
Our speakers are going to have to leave by no later than 1:30. They've got another appointment coming up on their schedule. So I'm glad that they have left us plenty of time for questions. I just want to go over David's rules for questioners. I will entertain questioners from people who have their hands up. I will try to get to everybody without favoritism. And I would only ask the following. When called upon, you identify yourself as a courtesy to the audience and the speakers, your name and affiliation if you have one, that you ask your question as briefly as possible, because most of us will be more interested in the answer than we are in your question, trust me. Third, do not make statements. You can ask Kate to give you a platform at some other time for presenting your own extended point of view. And finally, ask a single question. No two-part questions, no multiple-part questions. I have a difficulty in keeping them all in mind. And if you have a second question, you just go to the end of the line. Maybe we'll get to you later. Okay, with that introduction, I will entertain hands up. Gentleman on the aisle. Yes, sir, you.